Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. Hello, Jaimee.
Yes.
It finally worked.
It did? Okay. Because I didn't see anything different, but if you say so.
Well, the how we know it works is that I'm saying something and then you hear my voice and your voice is coming in loud and clear. So this is how it's supposed to go. So.
Okay, well, that's pretty funny, actually. All right, we're good.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce you and say why you're on the show again. Jaimee Wriston has been on before in 2019, where we talked about her career as a writer, fiction, teaching, and of course her daughter's been on, Miley. And we're bringing you back because you have a new book out. How Not to Drown is the name of the book. And it's brand new. It's hot off the presses. I thought it would be really interesting, if you're willing to play along, Jaimee, to discuss the process of making an art object, in this case a novel, from conception to inception to going to market, art direction, publishing, anything you want to talk about. And I thought it'd be really exciting to talk about both some of the, details of the novel, what it concerns, but also the experience of making something and putting it out into the world. Any thoughts you have about that? So how does that sound to you, Jaimee?
Oh, that sounds great.
So let's do it. Talk about, I guess, first, how you came to write this particular book after Vanishing Acts and the story of that.
Okay, well, this book was actually in conception stage before I ever, put out Vanishing Acts into the world. I seem to have a, backlog maybe of book ideas, and sometimes one of them will come to fruition. I mean, Vanishing Acts was years of trying, revisions, etc. This one, I had been thinking about actually when Vanishing Acts was published and had done some of the research. I went over to the Isle of Skye and, got both the place location research and then looked into the clearances. What happened was I found out relatively late in life that the Scottish part of my family had been involved in the clearances. They had basically been tenant farmers, and they and hundreds of other families all over the Scottish Highlands and the Hebrides were, kicked out of their houses, sometimes forcibly, sometimes very violent. Houses were burned, etc., and were left virtually homeless. And having found this out was just crazy. I mean, I went through my entire adult life knowing that my great-grandmother was Scottish, but never having been told that, about this other factor of how she got here in the first place, or actually to Prince Edward Island and then to Honolulu, which is where I'm from. So I was before, maybe, about the time Vanishing Acts was being finished and going through editing, etc., I went over to the Isle of Skye, and I ended up doing research there and also taking a very, very long hike in the rain that no one else was interested in doing with me. So I did it to where I had researched and thought that my family homestead would have been. And it was to ruins, and it was a 10-mile hike, arduous in places. I mean, one of the Isle of Skye's nicknames is the Misty Isle, and some of those rocks I had to scramble over were quite wet, and it was probably pretty treacherous, but I was determined, having gotten this far to the, to the Isle of Skye, and this was the last day to do this hike. So I went, and when I got there, I had to climb a cattle fence, but then once I was inside this enclosure, and I was standing on a particular part of the ruins, looking out to the sea, and I just suddenly had this mystical feeling, this sense that this was it, that this was the ruins of their home. So once I got back to the Isle of Skye, the other place that I ended up going was Prince Edward Island, and to the lighthouse, the place they would have landed. So I was gathering all of this.
Wow.
At the time of Vanishing Act coming out.
Wow.
And it was amazing. And then I was ready to start writing the book.
Well, it's that story alone really brings home a theme on our podcast, Journey of an Aesthete, because we just had a guest on. I don't know when. Actually, this month that we're recording this, we had a trombonist on and composer, and he has material that he reworks and reworks and reworks, and I'm going to choose different instruments, and it's just a long process of trying to make up his mind about what to do and the freedom to do it. In your case, it involves the most deeply personal matters of family and matters of political injustice and land and geography. And, I want to get to this in a second, because in your novel, it also takes an ecological dimension. I mean, there's spiritual dimensions in your novel having to do with people trying to, forge or cobble together their own faith or their own spirituality, especially some of the younger characters in the novel. But then there's also this ecological dimension because of the climate change and bad weather and strange weather and the saga. The saga of this particular family, who I grew to love. I must say, I read the book very recently. I just finished it a couple days ago in time for this. And I could say that I could tell the listeners out there, they should, this is a really good novel. And it's really about so much in one novel. And you really come to know these people as real people in the world. And there's a lot at stake. So I've said too much, but what I'm saying is you're finding out things about your own family, right? And this hike, and then you're probably, because you're already a writer, that's probably good for you in a certain sense, right? Because it gives you something, what you want to do, right? You're sort of thinking, I want to do something with this material. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, the whole story didn't come to me all at once, but I knew I wanted to tell Maggie's story.
Yes.
But I also knew that I didn't want the book to be just an historical novel. That's not really what I do as a writer, and I was excited about doing it somewhat.
Yeah.
But what I'm really interested in is how the past plays into the present, how what happened to Maggie and her family, became the modern day McQueens in Massachusetts, and what sort of hangs on to that violence.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing again, your novel has so much, I'm praising it very highly because of these connections. I often think that sometimes artists see connections that maybe other people don't see. So you have woman in 1850, and yet but you go back and forth between the present tense. I don't know if it's the 80s, 90s of these contemporary people, that it's the same family, distant relations, and the reader is able to see connections between things and see how, behaviors get repeated. And it's not I should say it's not in a crude or on the nose fashion. It's very, very deep. It's a work of art. It's a novel. And so the reader feels these things as they're reading And also, this is very much your style, Jaimee, is, from the point of view from the inside out of the speaker, whether it's Heaven or Daniel or, Graham Amelia and Leo and all these characters, right? Amelia, you give them their title. The title is the character, and then the character is often running and speaking from their point of view. It's wonderful how you did that. But I guess I'm interested in, you said you're not a historical novelist, but yet you seem to take to it pretty well. It's, you should succeed in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk.
Yeah, but I think what you were talking about with the connections,
Mm-hmm.
that's what is really interesting to me. How family connections can play out through the generations. And if you recall in Vanishing Acts, I did that, but it was 4 generations and they were connected,
Mm-hmm.
the grandfather, the mother, and so on. But in this case, it was the influence of, 100, almost 200 years. Well, not quite 200, but well over 100 years later, and how the family functioned with those kind of connections.
Uh-huh. It's beautiful because you have a character in prison, a woman in prison, and you have, because of that, her child has to be taken care of by other relatives, right?
Right.
And that's I really enjoy reading about that and the way you express that. Talk about how you developed your ideas about, dealing with the criminal justice system and dealing with, how we care for the young, and just talk a little bit. Is really, really impressed with how you weave that, if you don't mind. Just look a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it was actually fairly interesting because Cassie, Heaven's mother, originally had a much bigger part in the novel, and this kind of shoots us back to, your original question about a novel coming into the world. My editor felt that I had too many point of view strands going on, where each character had their own perspective, and that the audience
could you hold that
for it,
thought. So your editor was editor was complaining about the very thing I like about Jaimee Wriston's fiction. So in other words, do you tell your editor, well, that's my style. That's what I'm known for. This is what I do. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, and I told her that. I told her this is the way I write books. This is what I'm interested in. Yeah. But, she didn't want to take it all out. She just thought it would be more powerful to have Cassie and Mercy, both of whom had perspective sections that alternated with the rest, if they would just appear in the family, the main family's time frame. So, I grumbled, honestly, I did, but she was not going to turn back. So I thought, all right, well, I'll give it a try. And I do like the book, but I do miss having those other 2 characters. But of course, they do show up. Cassie is very important. It's Heaven's mom.
It's interesting. The question of editors and writers is not a straightforward one, right? Because there's your example, and again, you have a good editor. I don't mean any. I'm fair-minded on my show, and your editor has their reasons, and you have your reasons. Conversely, though, there are cases where artists change their entire style because of an editor. And they take, the most famous example for me is Raymond Carver, right? Because Raymond Carver.
I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
Because Raymond Carver wrote like, Henry James or Updike.
Yeah.
Long syntax and all these, which I would love to have seen some of that stuff because I never saw it. And his editors said, why don't you try writing, why don't you change the syntax? And that's it's an interesting question, right? So we only know the Raymond Carver we know, right? At least I do. You have any thoughts about the role of style, and does it matter who comes up with it, or I guess it matters how the artist feels, right?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up Raymond Carver, because that is, I teach one of his minimalist collections in my advanced fiction workshop, and then I I bring in a couple of his more maximal stories to compare.
Yeah.
We talk about revision and the idea of developing a piece to its full potential, which is what Carver did after he cut away from, Gordon Lish, his editor's influence. But in this case, my editor loved the style, and she loved the characters. She just thought there were too many of them. But it was still very hard for me to, she said to me, "You have to kill your darlings, Jaimee." So I've joked with people that I've kept my darlings in a little computer file, and someday I will bring out a book, The Darlings, and Cassie and Mercy will have their.
It's funny because I have to say that if I did not know any of this, and I just started reading this, as just a reader outside, it reads just like Shark Girls or Vanishing Act. So in a sense, that's a good sign. So you're still yourself. In other words, clearly you haven't, I don't want to give the impression that, you're still very much your own writer, and that comes through. And so that's, would you agree with that you haven't, you're still very much.
Oh, yeah. Voice? Yeah, totally. No, I mean, I don't think she probably wouldn't have acquired the book for the press if she didn't like the style. She loved the style. She just thought that, there was just too many strands of point of view characters, and that readers would want to kind of settle into this family. And it made enough sense to me because, of course, I was doing a book about the connections to a family from long ago and how that played into this family. So it made sense. It was just hard for me because you mentioned Cassie in prison and the criminal justice system. I taught at a maximum state prison in Maine for 5 years, and it was a profound influence on me. So I think probably some of that rubs off whenever I do a character that is in prison or. I guess Wild Things was a collection.
That's right.
Yeah, and that has a story with the prison. But the book that I did that was mostly about that was called Climbing the God Tree, and that was my second novel in stories, and that came out in 97, 98. So that's the first. That's quite a bit older.
Well, as you know, that's the first thing of yours I read, and Miley told me to read that. It's because of Miley. That's the reason why we're talking.
Oh, right.
Miley said read a book called Climbing the God Tree, and so I did because she told me to.
So that was the book that you read. Oh, I was thinking it was Shark Girls. Interesting. Okay.
Shark Girls was afterwards.
Yes, it was quite a bit afterwards, actually, because that was.
For me, they were closer together. So I was reading Climbing the God Tree. Probably about a decade after it was probably published or written. So which you do, but books are books do have an eternal dimension, even though they're bound to earth. You could pick a book up. I mean, the point of a book.
That's right.
The very point of a book is you could pick it up in the morning or the night or in 1997 or 2021, and hopefully it'll speak to you or have something to say to you. So, but I love this novel, and I of course want people to go out and read it and get it. Before we talk about a little bit about the process of publishing and art direction and all that, do you mind reading from it a little bit? Like reading,
sure.
Because there's, I'm really fascinated by the child's point of view in this book, what you do with that. I don't know why. There's something, it's almost comic and also very just, it's right? It's comic, but also devastating. Do you mind reading some of that, or something that you picked out? You might want to read Maggie's journey on the ship.
Oh no,
amazing. I mean,
I love it all. I'm good with whatever you would like me to read.
It's up to you. Just pick something and read it. You're a good reader.
Okay. You haven't actually picked out a section.
I did, but I don't want to tell you. Unless you want me to tell you. I mean, I thought it'd be interesting to, one of the heaven passages, right, where, looking at the grown-ups like these weird creatures that are ignoring them. And, they're always snorting and sticking, the pipe and all that. It's just really brilliant, I think.
Well, I'm looking at a section here where she's on the pool deck being ready. She's ready to try out for swim team, which of course she. This means a lot to her because she's being bullied in school, and she figures that if there's something she could do really well, which is swimming, that if she makes the team, these kids would have to respect her more. And of course, if they don't, she has a plan, which is, the drowning songs and that's where the Celtic mythology comes in again. But I could read this little bit about her when she's about to. Okay. Heaven on deck, the swim coach called it. You go on deck when she calls your name for swim team tryouts. French lane 6, the coach shouts into her bullhorn. Heaven rushes down the narrow row of bleachers to the bottom row, where, of course, Bethany Harrison and the B girls, who are already on the team, so they get to sit in front, stick out their feet to trip her. Oops, stepped on Brittany's little pinky toe. Pig, Brittany howls. Sorry, Heaven says, head down. Don't look them in the eyes. Yeah, not really, she mutters under her breath. The sky overhead is a hard March blue with puffy cirrus clouds like smoke rings. A wind picks up suddenly. Heaven shivers. It's too cold for them to open this outdoor pool yet. What are they thinking? It's not even spring, Grandmelia had bitched yesterday. Maybe she was right. Never mind, Heaven thinks. The ocean is deep, dark, and cold. She can handle it. She'll rock this town pool. Heaven on the starting block, lane 6. Look to her left, lane 7. A small Rachel something, not a B girl, not even a 7th grader yet, so not a threat. To her right, a girl who's getting homeschooled. No one seems to know her. Heaven takes a deep breath, practices holding it in like she did in Grandmelia's pool, counts, blows out. Her heart is beating like crazy in her chest, like a snare drum's in there. Tap, tappity tap. Sudden mouth fart noises from the bleachers. Then Bethany's tinkly fake laugh made louder so Heaven hears. Coach blows her whistle. Listen up, girls. Positions. Heaven and the rest of them on deck, readying themselves to dive in, knees bent, arms out over their heads, chins tucked. You know the drill. Freestyle, backstroke, butterfly, breath, then out. I want you to go as fast as you can without compromising the strokes. Got it? The stroke is all, Coach shouts. Stroke is all, breathe, breathe. Just concentrate, her dad used to tell her. Think it out. That was before his own mind kind of drifted away. But still, Heaven hears him whisper in her head. Shweet goes the whistle, and she's in. Stroke, stroke, breathe, pull, stroke, breathe, pull, flip turn, and again, stroke is all, breathe, breathe. Heaven swimming. It's all she wants to do. Stroke, breathe, pull, suck in a big breath, flip turn, repeat. She feels great. Like this, right now, this is her, Heaven swimming. When she's done, she clasps onto the deck at the end of the pool for a moment, catching her breath. And for just a moment, she peers up at the bleachers and imagines her mom there with a couple of the other moms, her real mom, cinnamon hair, pale skin, smiling at Heaven. You did it, sweetheart. Not that she ever called Heaven that, but her dad did sometimes. Her mom probably thought it anyway. Heaven hoists herself up on the deck as the rest of the lanes finish, one after the other. Rachel has laughed, and Heaven sees her panting, her eyes tearing up through her swim goggles as she clutches the deck. Heaven offers her hand to help Rachel out. Swimmers, listen up, Coach says, walking behind them now on the swim deck. If I call your name, you made the team. If I don't, that means you keep working your strokes. The stroke is all. Then you try again next year. Heaven holds her breath as the coach calls out names of the older girls who tried out first, the division over the one Heaven's trying for. She peers up at the sky, clouds, maybe even a snowflake or two, as that chilly wind picks up again. But that's okay. Anything to distract her from the B-girls making fart noises until she hears it. Heaven French, Division 2. I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's I really like, that passage of the sounds. That's pure poetry. I like how you go into that. Totally poetic.
Oh, thank you.
Totally poetic mode, with the smack, and it's a weird. It's kind of like what Updike does in Wife Wooing a little bit, right? Except, right, you know the passage I'm talking about, the Updike, but you're taking it and you're.
Yes, well, I know his work. Yeah.
But that those kind of effects, but you're turning it on its head, and it's a little girl's soliloquy and not a married man. It's extraordinary. No, I could go. It's really, So I'm happy you read that. Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. I'm wondering, I know you have a lot to say about producing something and getting it out into the world, but, this novel and what comes to mind, the process of that, because I know you're teaching at a school, you're teaching at Ben Hampton, and but yet you have to deal with publishers and I guess art directors, and go talk a little bit about the journey of that, if you don't mind, because that's.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, this book was a slightly different journey for me because my other books have all been in the small press world, literary presses and university presses. Yep. And so my agent thought that it would be good for me to do something bigger this time with the hopes that I would increase my audience. So this press is interesting because it's listed as an independent press, but it has Penguin Random House distribution, and they're kind of the umbrella over some of these other affiliates. So on the one hand, it's independent, but on a very big hand, Penguin Random House is the largest publishing conglomerate. So it's been interesting. What you gain in readership, maybe, and because this press sells everything commercially, right. You sort of lose in being able to have a say in things that I'm used to having a say in. For instance, I was not a fan of the cover, but I did not have a say in that. That became a bit of a fight.
You and I both not crazy about the cover, to put it mildly. I concur. So we're here, but talk about that's a battle you have to give up, right? They're going to choose the cover, right?
Exactly. There's things you have to give up to, deal with the bigger presses, and so I did not have a say in that. Although I do like the color scheme. The color scheme itself has grown on me, but it's just it's not the kind of cover that I'm used to, because I'm used to having what I want. When you with the smaller indie presses, they'll give you some input for sure, but they generally let you choose what you like, and if they like it, they will go with it.
Well, this certainly isn't as striking as Shark Girl's cover, which is Miley's contribution, right? That cover is beautiful.
Exactly.
That cover is amazing.
Well, Miley's contribution was also Vanishing Act.
That's right. So it's
Vanishing Act and Shark Girls.
And Shark Girls.
They were both her photography.
Yep.
So, and then Wild Things was an artist, a cover artist actually, that the press worked with, and I told him I had a sort of design in mind, and I told him what I had in mind, and he came up with Wild Things, which, and we sort of worked on it together. He came up with this kind of beautiful cover, but I wanted some other things shown on it, and we just worked on it, and it's one of my favorite covers. So I did not have that experience with this. I also didn't have, the title is not mine, but the title has grown on me.
What was your title?
They picked
originally?
Oh, it's funny because I had 20, I came up with so many other titles. I'm not even sure I can remember exactly the one. I mean, there was The Weight of Water. That was one that I was very fond of, and no, they didn't like it. And another one was Stealing Heaven, which
what was the last one?
I thought they would go for that.
The Days of Heaven?
Stealing Heaven, because she has a shoplifting problem. I thought that'd be really, but no. I think it was the one that I was pushing for was The Weight of Water, but they didn't like it. I have come to actually like the title now. I was a little appalled that, when it was changed, but that didn't take me as long to get used to as the cover, which I'm still getting used to.
I'm not,
so
I just, when you mentioned that the title could have been Stealing Heaven or Weight of Water, both of which are fantastic titles. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't know how not to drown. So do they, when they make these decisions, is it based on, do they do like statistical algorithmic measurements of audiences to come up with this stuff, or do they must, right? They must have their own, it's like they have. Yeah,
they kind of do. I mean, they know their audience, and they know the audience they're marketing to. And they really, I mean, the press has a marketing department, and, I guess they've had a certain amount of success with books, and so they're not willing to accommodate untested waters.
That's right.
to use a strange illusion.
Yeah, they don't want to risk, because they've done this thing before in their mind, and they looked at the sales of what they did, and so they say, well, when we did X, Y, and Z, it sold. So that means you have to do X, Y, and Z, right? It's kind of a very linear, mechanistic kind of.
Exactly.
It's very anti-Humean, right? Because David Hume said that precedence doesn't tell you much, right? It wasn't a David Hume that called the question, if yesterday so-and-so happened, that doesn't mean that's the same thing that's going to happen today. You can't know for sure. So it's a strange, they haven't read their Hume or something, or they haven't, I don't know. It's kind of,
I would guess that, I'm sure that's the case.
Speaking of the Scottish, right? I brought in a Scot when I mentioned David Hume. I had to bring in a Scot.
Yeah, right.
So I just wondering, you're going through all these running through hoops. Is it like running through hoops, complying with all these things, or what is it? But yet you have this book that's going to, Yeah, I mean, there are things that they did that I really love. I think the inside of the book is terrific. The pages are a nice weight. The inside design is done really well. It feels like a really, I don't know, a book that'll last. It feels like it's been done well. It's been treated well. And I should add, there's a great photo of you. So there's a good author photograph in there too, if that matters to you,
And
Yeah.
And I finally got a new author photo. I mean, I had been using the same one for the last 3 books, and I decided, this is probably time to move on in life and, acknowledge that I'm, whatever the age of those other photos, I'm not anymore. So, so I did that. And all of that went into the cover, in this case, the book flap. But I wasn't, the blurbs that we got, they trimmed down some of them, and I was sort of disappointed in that, because they were very good blurbs, but I was informed by my publicist that that's what the New York trade presses do now, which is to give just kind of a punchline from the blurbs, because they believe that, people aren't going to spend a lot of time reading the blurbs, but they will notice certain things. So all this is done by, almost like you said, by algorithm marketing calculations. And that's very different for me. And, at this time next year, if the book has sold well and gone into another printing, of course, I will be delighted with them. And I'll very happily say, you were right. You were right about everything.
You bring up that's a very profound point, because aesthetics, when you make an aesthetic object, and when I say aesthetic object, it doesn't have to be an object, right? It could be performance, it could be stand-up comedy, it could be process, it could be seen in the woods. Doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a thing. But when you make an aesthetic object, you're always having to deal with the world. And, how am I going to get this out in the world? That's a very basic, right? That's a part of it, right? The very basic part of communication, right? Communicating.
Exactly, yeah.
Do you want to say anything about some of the content of the novel? I mean, one of the things, of course, is the substance abuse of these parents when they have a young child, and the drugs and the shoplifting, and kind of the emotional volatility, and the aspect of justice and inequity. Do you want to talk about any of those things, or is that just part of the intergenerational?
Well, I mean, I did want that sense of the the kind of violence, both as the historical act of the clearances, right down to the personal violence that Maggie experiences on the boat from the sailor.
That's right.
And of course her drowning, although then some magic happens. But I wanted to kind of bring that into the 21st century, where it looks a bit different. The drug abusing of Amelia's older son, and then the wife that he picks out. Of course, this ultimately affects their daughter tremendously. I mean, she's a survivor. She has to deal with what she's been given, which a lot of the times when she observes her parents, as she calls it, sniffing stuff up their nose and smoking, etc. She's the one who ends up having to take care of them. And so when she is put out into the world, what does she do? Well, she steals. Right. These that there are results, from this kind of behavior. And so that was kind of a way to show how these acts of violence continue, even this many years later, from when that happened in the clearances. And then, of course,
it connects to political economy, right? So political economy, oppression, economic exploitation, conditions of the Scottish, English imperialism. So you're showing how it's very, again, that part of the novel is very clear, and it's very beautifully wrought. But I think, that you're able to get inside the point of view of the characters, which is your strength. And because of that, that's what makes it go beyond a political tract, or that's the thing that fiction can do, good fiction. And you accomplish that beautifully in this novel. And so I'm happy that you have a big publisher, because I hope that means people will hear about it and read it. So,
yeah, I hope so. It came out at a difficult time, because in 2020 with the pandemic, a lot of the books that were scheduled to come out were postponed to 2021. So my book is in the company of twice as many books that would normally be published in 1 year. And of course, everyone would like the limelight or even just a little piece of it for their book. So, we'll see if it ultimately gets noticed. But I always feel if a few readers love it, I've done something that I'm proud of. And if people love it, then even if it's not hundreds of thousands, well, so be it. If it's a few and it means something, then, that's good. Well, and I guess that's kind of the way art is.
It is. I mean, I hope people hear this podcast and they buy the book. It's a more practical.
I hope so.
I guess that's a more practical perspective, but, but that's my hope. Certainly. That's why I'm having you on the show. But it's not just that. I'm interested in how things get to be made. And, just that one fact that you're with a bigger publisher and you're not using your daughter's photos and you're having to do things to their house, that in itself is interesting, right? And that's a big part. That's a big part of an artist's life, right? Is the practicality of getting something made in the context, or even the context of history, right? That it happens after COVID or happens in this particular summer or spring or something.
Yeah,
that matters too, right? It's all it all plays a role, I think. Is there anything else you want to tell potential readers or future readers about the mythological and mystical aspects of the novel, which I love and which are plenty?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, please do, because I'm interested in all those things. So whatever comes to your mind, about that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. A lot of times people read the book and it's almost like they're the mystical factors and the Celtic tales are sort of an afterthought. They're more interested in the familial conflicts, etc., which I'm in one way I'm happy about in the sense that if these characters are brought to life properly, then they should be compelling. And the fact that people want to talk about them or focus on them is great. But the mystical part of it, the Celtic tales, was a huge thing for me.
Absolutely.
I
can tell you,
it's another.
I can.
What's that?
If you don't mind me interjecting, as a reader, it's not second place at all. Far from it. It's very important to.
I'm glad.
But it's also been in your other work. It plays a role in Shark Girls. So it's not an entirely new territory for you, right? But
it's true, and it was reviewed in Booklist, and the reviewer actually brought that up. She was talking about my signature themes, and one of the things she mentioned was mystical beings. So I'm glad that some other people are noticing that. But for me, it was just another way of drawing that connection back from the 21st century McQueens to the 1800s to, this original family from the Isle of Skye. And for Daniel, who lives a lot in his head, being agoraphobic, and of course, having had that near drowning experience, this is to him, they are real. And he is, he is convinced that he was saved by a Selkie. So, and I think he tells Heaven these tales both to give her a grounding sense in her heritage. She's being bullied at school. She doesn't get along with her grandmother. Her mom's in prison. Her dad is dead. I mean, she's just, she could be such a lost child. And he gives her these tales to let her feel a connection to, a heritage that goes beyond all of that. So, and then, of course, the mystical, I did have a lot of fun in that last quarter of the book, when Maggie is in the shipwreck and she doesn't make it out of there. And, she there's that kind of magical realist passage of her being born to safety, but underwater to this island, and how, she doesn't really need to breathe anymore.
Yep.
But I don't really spell it out right, but I think the alert reader realizes, well, this woman is talking to me from the 1800s, so something happened here.
Well, it's
so yeah.
Every reader, like I'm a reader that's not a materialist, right? So because I'm not a scientific materialist, I'm very open to certain kinds of metaphysical claims or things that you would call supernatural. Yeah. At the same time, I'm not dogmatic. So those things don't put me off. I'm totally open, of course, to those things in your novel. And so I would hope other readers can suspend their normal,
Exactly. You have to suspend your disbelief. And that's the act of reading fiction in general, and fiction that, of course, goes beyond the realist. You just have to suspend a little bit more of the disbelief to. But I felt that by drawing upon and giving a number of different Celtic tales that the reader would hopefully be able to kind of get involved in that world, a more magical world, and suspend that disbelief and just say, oh, okay, so this seal that is barking outside the house during a storm possibly is not just a seal, and of course Heaven notices that in the harbor scene up in Maine when she's run away, that the seal has these eyes that all the McQueens have, the color of the sea.
Oh, wow. That's beautiful. I really, it's great to talk with you about this, your novel. And it's a real treat. And for listeners, the book is How Not to Drown. The author is our guest, Jaimee Wriston. And where should they get this book? It's from a large publisher. It's from... what is the publisher?
Oh, it's pretty. The publisher is Alcove Press. The distributor, Penguin Random House, and they could go to the Penguin Random House title. They could go to Amazon. Booksellers would be able to easily order it through Penguin Random House. It would be available. It's at a lot of online retailers, I noticed.
Well, that's great news. And so all good things come to an end, even this. So is there anything that you want to say? Is there anything you want to say in conclusion about your novel, about anything that's close to your heart as we conclude, want to say to our listeners?
Well, I think the novel is particularly close to my heart because it, although it was not my great grandmother's experience, it was kind of her personal voyage that she took. Her family coming from the Isle of Skye, and then she was born on Prince Edward Island, and then managed to huge farm family, too big, too many mouths to feed, not well off at all. So she and her sister trained as nurses and made it all the way out to San Francisco, where she was hired as a nurse for William Randolph Hearst to go over to Honolulu. And it was that voyage afterwards where my great-grandfather hired her to help with his 5 kids that he had already, and his wife was ailing, and she eventually died, and my great-grandmother married him, and here I am as a result. And, but that was all the Scottish story and background that sort of, so the book is very personal to me. It really is.
It's funny. It
means a lot.
It's my favorite of everything, about everything you've written thus far, I think. And I don't know whether I don't know if it's because it's that intimacy, closeness to your life, or not. Maybe yes. I don't know, but I did enjoy it that much, and I really appreciate your generosity and time, but also your clarity in expressing your experience, getting this out into the world, so listeners can get a peek into what that's like and what it entails. So thank you, Jaimee Wriston, for that.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on the show. Such a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you on, and be safe out there. Thank you. Good.
Thank you. Bye. Good night.
I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.